France extending its state of emergency just hours before the attack. France's President Hollande announcing plans to actually lift that warning. A former Margaret Thatcher advisor, Niall Gardner, says Europe is being way too lax when it comes to terror, and that's one of the main reasons why the British voted to leave the EU. Niall, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Charles.
You know, I guess the idea that they were already in a state of emergency and this happened makes you wonder just exactly what happens during a state of emergency, and is that going to be enough to just sort of thwart these things in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, you know, despite all of the efforts in place by the French government, we are seeing continuing terror attacks in France and across Europe as well in recent months. And without a doubt, you know, Europe is at war with Islamist terrorists. And unfortunately, I think there is there's a culture of complacency that has been in place in many parts of Europe for far too long. I think that you've had, the appeasement of the Islamist extremists within their midst in Europe. You've seen a lack of leadership, frankly, from key European figures. And all of this is combined, of course, with decades of mass immigration, largely from the Muslim world into Europe, and also an open borders policy within the European Union, which is a policy of absolute insanity. And this policy has allowed Islamist extremists to move from one country to another within Europe. And I think that we're now seeing the consequences, frankly, of many decades of terrible left-wing policies that have allowed the Islamists to really firmly implant themselves in Europe.
No, and again, I've studied this from an economic point of view. You talk about decades of this policy, but apparently, at least economists say this is sort of a necessary evil, for lack of a better term, because of the plunging birth rates in Europe and the idea of having replacement workers, and that maybe the crux of the problem is, unlike America, where our immigrants seem to really, a lot of them come from Christian countries to begin with, and they come, and I think we have a culture here, a melting pot culture for whatever it is. For the most part, they assimilate. They become Yankees fans soon, whatever. Is it the immigration issue, or is it the lack of assimilation? And if it is assimilation, who's got the greater role in making that happen, the immigrants or the countries that take them in?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, actually. It's a combination, really, of very liberal immigration policies combined with, the lack of assimilation of immigrants into many European countries. Certainly France has not been particularly successful at assimilating immigrants. I think Britain has been actually a lot more successful in doing so. And also, I think the intelligence services, actually, in the United Kingdom have been far more successful than they have been in European countries. And I think that there has been an intelligence breakdown in many European countries, especially in places like Belgium, for example, which has become a hornet's nest of terrorist extremism. And then you throw into the mix, of course, the European Union's open borders policy in the Schengen area, which I think is absolutely disastrous in terms of the fight against Islamist terrorism. And I think, you have a recipe for, for great problems within the European countries. And the Nice massacre is just the latest in a long line of attacks in France and across parts of Western Europe in the last 18 months. And it's the shape of things to come, unless you're going to see European leaders actually, willing to stand up to the Islamists.
They're going to have to stand up sooner or later. I think they're being forced to, unfortunately, instead of heeding warnings, takes acts like this. Niall, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Charles.